Have you ever stopped to think about what happens to a soldier when the war ends? No, seriously. Think about it for a second. We see in movies that glorious moment of returning home, the hugs, the tears of joy, the waving flag. But what happens after that? And when the cameras turn off, when the patriotic speeches end, when the smoke from the fireworks dissipates in the air? What's left for those who truly bled on the battlefield? While generals climbed the podium to receive glittering medals and promotions that guaranteed the rest of their lives, thousands of privates returned home in silence. No fanfare, no recognition, no future. They disembarked from military planes at American bases, stepped onto familiar soil, but returned as strangers in their own land. And you know what's most shocking? This is the story no one tells about post-war America. Imagine the scene. You're in your early 20s, you've just survived hell on earth, you've seen things no human being should ever see, you've lost friends who were like brothers. You return, hoping for what exactly? Maybe a decent job, maybe treatment for the nightmares that keep you awake at night, maybe just someone who understands the weight you carry on your shoulders. But what you find is a society that has already moved on, that wants to forget the war, that looks at you with a strange mixture of pity and discomfort. Meanwhile, those who commanded from air-conditioned offices, making decisions miles away from the front lines, they were the ones who received the honors. Government positions, generous pensions that guaranteed comfort until the end of their lives, instant social respect. The difference was brutal, almost obscene. Two men emerged from the same war, but entered completely opposite realities. One rose, the other fell into a void that few can imagine. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might surprise you, move you, and perhaps completely change the way you see these war stories. We're talking about Detroit in the 70s, Los Angeles after Vietnam, Seattle after Iraq. We're talking about men and women who returned broken, completely forgotten by the system they swore to defend, but who found something so powerful within themselves that they achieved the impossible, to rise from their own ashes. Have you ever been through this? Ever felt like you gave your all for something or someone and then were simply left behind? Then you'll understand the pain of these soldiers. But you'll also understand the incredible strength that exists within a human being when they decide that the story doesn't end with the fall. Because this isn't a story about victims. Far from it. This is a story about transformation, about how the deepest pain can become the fuel for the most radical change. About how forgotten soldiers became the true heroes of their own lives and the lives of thousands of other veterans who came after them. While officers collected stars on their uniforms and posed for photos at gala dinners, these privates were in the trenches of a different war, a war against addiction, against trauma, against abandonment, against the inner voice that said every day, "Give up." And what they did with this silent battle will leave you speechless. Get ready, because now we're going to learn about these stories up close. But before we delve deep into these impossible transformations, I need to ask you something. If this topic resonates with you, if you've somehow experienced what it's like to be forgotten after giving your best, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It can be a word, a phrase, even a similar story you've lived or know. You know why? Because each comment you leave here isn't just a text lost on the internet. It's a way of showing that these stories matter, that these lives matter, and that there are people on the other side paying attention. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content that nobody else is sharing. While everyone else is stuck on superficial headlines and shallow stories, we delve into what truly transforms lives. And look, if you enjoy this format, if you want to see more deep, moving and true stories about people who have risen from pain, click like now. Because this helps the algorithm understand that there's an audience for quality content, that there are people tired of superficiality. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, dude, hit that subscribe button now. Activate the bell too, because every week I bring you stories like this that move us, that make us think, that prove that human beings are capable of extraordinary things even when everything seems lost. You won't want to miss the next video, I guarantee it. This is a community of people who believe that real stories have more power than any fiction, and you're already a part of it just by being here now. Now, let's get to the stories that will give you goosebumps. To help you understand the magnitude of what we're talking about here, I need to show you a contrast so absurd it seems unbelievable. But it's not. It's the stark truth about what happened to thousands of lives after the wars ended. Think about it, two men fight in the same war, breathe the same air full of smoke and gunpowder, hear the same screams, feel the same fear running down their spines. But when they return home, it's as if they've returned to different planets. The officer, the guy who commanded from a more protected position, who had access to privileged information and made strategic decisions, he returns and finds a red carpet waiting for him. Not literally, of course, but almost. Government positions appear as if by magic. Generous pensions ensure he never has to worry about money again. Social respect, oh, that comes in double. People look at him with admiration, invite him to events, want to hear his stories of leadership and courage. He becomes a reference, an example, a symbol. Now the private, the one who truly got his boots dirty, who held the weapon with trembling hands, who saw his friend fall beside him and couldn't do anything. He returns and finds closed doors, unemployment, untreated trauma, families who can no longer recognize who he has become. He seeks help and hears that he needs to be strong, that he needs to overcome, that others have gone through worse and are doing well. But no one asks how he really is. No one offers a helping hand in a concrete way. The numbers don't lie. After the Vietnam War, it's estimated that over 500,000 veterans were homeless at some point in their lives. 500,000. Let that sink in for a second. These men and women literally risked everything, and when they returned, they ended up sleeping on bridges, in overcrowded shelters, in old cars. Meanwhile, generals were writing best-selling books, giving expensive motivational speeches, and building brilliant political careers. The difference in fate was obscene. And look, I'm not saying that officers don't deserve recognition. Far from it. But what happened was such a brutal disparity that it revealed a hidden truth about how society values people. The closer you were to the front line, to real danger, to concrete death, the less you were remembered afterward. It's as if the system said, "Thank you for your sacrifice. Now get out of our sight because you remind us of things we'd rather forget." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because to understand the transformation that follows, you need to truly know the people. And the first person I want to introduce you to is James Miller. This name might not mean anything to you now, but I guarantee that in a few minutes you won't forget it. James was 22 when he returned from 2 tours in Vietnam in 1970. 22. The age when many people are finishing college, thinking about their first job, about which path to follow in life. But James no longer had the luxury of that innocence. He had seen things that aged his soul decades in just a few months. When the military plane landed in Detroit, he descended those metal stairs and stepped onto American soil, feeling absolutely nothing. Complete emptiness. In the first few months, James tried. He really tried. He looked for work, but employers looked at his resume and saw only a young man who had spent years in an unpopular war. No transferable skills, no relevant experience. As if surviving hell taught nothing about resilience, teamwork, or decision-making under pressure, as if all that was worthless in the real world. And then the symptoms began that no one talked about at the time. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, wasn't even properly diagnosed yet. James would wake up every night drenched in sweat, screaming at enemies that only existed in his mind. Any loud noise, and he would instinctively throw himself to the ground, seeking cover. Fireworks on the 4th of July. Pure terror. He couldn't explain it to his family because he didn't even fully understand what was happening to his own brain. The drink started as a crutch, just one beer to calm his nerves. Then two. Then the whole bottle. Then anything that would make the noise inside his head stop for a few hours. In less than a year, James was addicted to alcohol, living in a miserable apartment in the suburbs of Detroit, without a steady job, doing odd jobs whenever he could get out of bed. At 23, he already looked 50. His journey could have ended there. Statistically, it should have ended. But something happened. Something James himself can't quite explain to this day. On a particularly difficult night, he was sitting on the steps of his apartment building, bottle in hand, looking at the gray Detroit sky, and he saw another veteran walk by. The guy had that look. That same lost look James saw in the mirror every day. And somehow, strangely enough, for the first time in months, James didn't feel completely alone. He struck up a conversation. He shared the bottle. And that night, the two talked about things they had never been able to talk about with anyone else. About the sound of the explosions that still echoed in their ears. About the faces of friends who didn't return. About the absurd guilt of being alive when so many had died. For the first time since he returned, James felt that someone truly understood. This chance encounter changed everything, because James realized something fundamental. He wasn't alone in this silent war. There were thousands like him, scattered throughout American cities, each fighting their own invisible battle. And that's where the purpose was born. If he could help even one person avoid going through what he was going through, perhaps his pain would have some meaning. The transformation wasn't quick, it wasn't easy. It took James years to truly quit drinking, to understand his triggers, to learn how to deal with the flashbacks without destroying himself. But he persisted. And as he healed, he helped others. It started small, just conversations in makeshift groups of veterans. Then it became something bigger, much bigger. Today, almost 50 years after that night in Detroit, James Miller is the founder of one of Michigan's largest shelters for homeless veterans. The place takes in more than 200 veterans a year, offers addiction treatment, trauma therapy, and job reintegration programs. All created by a man whom society had completely forgotten. A man who should have become just another tragic statistic, but who decided to transform his personal hell into salvation for others. But to get to this point, James had to face something most people can't even imagine. He had to fight against a wound no one could see, an invisible wound that bled inside every day. Because look at the cruelty of it all. When a soldier returns home with an amputated leg, people see it. They understand that that man sacrificed something tangible. There is immediate empathy, visible support. But when the soldier returns whole on the outside and shattered on the inside, nobody sees it. And what is not seen does not receive care. James suffered from such intense flashbacks that he literally returned to the Vietnamese jungle in his mind. He could be in the supermarket buying milk, and suddenly the smell of something, a specific noise, a shadow passing by too quickly, and that was it. He was back on that day his unit was ambushed. His heart raced, his hands sweated, the world around him ceased to make sense, and when he returned to reality, people looked at him as if he were crazy. The nightmares were worse. Every night, without exception, James relived the worst scenes of the war. He would wake up screaming, sometimes crying, always completely disoriented. His wife at the time couldn't take it anymore. She tried, I swear she tried, but how can you stay married to someone who wakes up every night thinking they're in combat? How can you create intimacy with someone who is physically present but mentally absent? Social isolation came naturally. James stopped going to family barbecues because he couldn't handle crowds. He stopped seeing old friends because he no longer had anything in common with them. How could he complain about traffic or talk about football when he had seen people die in front of him? Normal conversation seemed absurdly superficial. He felt like an alien in his own country. And do you know what message society was sending him? Be a man. Get over it. Others have gone through worse and are fine. You're exaggerating. You just need willpower. These seemingly harmless phrases were like stabs in the back, because they transformed his legitimate suffering into a weakness of character, as if he chose to have PTSD, as if it were a lack of masculinity or courage. What did the government offer at the time? Practically nothing. Some veterans' hospitals were completely overwhelmed, with months-long waiting lists for appointments. Therapists had no idea how to treat war trauma. Medications only made things more unclear without addressing the root problem. It was a failed system trying to care for broken people and failing miserably. And perhaps the cruelest part of all this was the stigma of asking for help. Because if you publicly admitted that you were suffering, that you needed psychological support, you became that weak veteran, the one who couldn't cope, the one who brought the war home. So most people, including James for a long time, hid it, pretended everything was fine while crumbling inside. This wasn't exclusive to men. In fact, there was a group that suffered even more from this imposed silence: the women who served. And this is where I need to introduce you to Maria Rodriguez, because her story will show you an even deeper layer of this entire injustice. Maria was a combat nurse in Vietnam. Let me repeat that: combat nurse. She wasn't in a safe base tending to minor injuries. She was in the midst of chaos, receiving soldiers torn apart by landmines, gunfire, and grenades. She held the hands of 18-year-old boys as they died far from home, whispering the names of mothers they would never see again. She made impossible decisions about who to try to save when she had limited resources and dozens of wounded arriving at the same time. Maria returned to Los Angeles in 1972, carrying a double trauma that almost no one recognized. First, the trauma of the war itself. The same horrific images, the same sounds that haunted her, the same bloody nightmares. But beyond that, she faced something that male veterans didn't have to deal with: the brutal gender discrimination of that time. Because consider the perverse irony of it. While she was in Vietnam, Maria was essential. The soldiers saw her as a guardian angel, as the difference between life and death. But when she returned, suddenly her service didn't count in the same way. Veteran groups didn't accept her because she was a woman. Society didn't believe that women could have seen things as traumatic as men. Even mental health professionals downplayed her suffering, suggesting it was just exaggerated female sensitivity. Maria sought help in various places. She knocked on the doors of veterans associations and was told that those spaces were for men. She tried to talk about her experiences and was interrupted by comments about how difficult it must have been for a girl to be in that environment, as if her gender made the images of mutilated bodies less traumatic, as if her tears were worth less than the tears not shed by men. Maria's isolation was twofold. She didn't fit into the civilized female world of the time, where women were expected to be delicate and concerned with domestic matters. But she was also not accepted in the world of veterans, where her presence challenged notions of masculinity and war. She was trapped in an identity limbo, belonging nowhere. For years, Maria worked in jobs that didn't utilize even 10% of her abilities. Shop assistant, secretary, temporary jobs that paid poorly and offered no sense of purpose. Meanwhile, male nurses who had returned from the war were getting positions in prestigious hospitals, were promoted, and were respected. The difference in treatment was stark, But just like James, Maria reached a turning point, and hers was even more dramatic, even more on the razor's edge between life and death. There was one night when everything became too heavy. The nightmares, the loneliness, the feeling of uselessness, the weight of carrying memories that no one wanted to hear. Maria picked up the phone, not knowing exactly who to call, just needing someone, anyone. On the other end of the line was a volunteer from a suicide prevention hotline. And this woman, who probably didn't even know what to say, simply listened. She listened to Maria talk for hours. She listened without judging, without minimizing, without trying to fix things. She simply witnessed her pain. And in that simple act of being truly heard, something changed inside Maria. She realized that if a stranger could make such a difference with just compassionate listening, imagine the impact someone with lived experience could have. Someone who truly understood because they had gone through something similar. That's where her mission was born. Maria went back to school, this time to study psychology. It was brutal. She was in her 30s, battling untreated PTSD, attending classes with people 10 years younger who had no idea what she had been through. But she persisted, because now she had a purpose bigger than herself. When she finally graduated and began working as a therapist, Maria did something revolutionary for the time. She specialized in war trauma with a focus on female veterans. She created safe spaces where women who had served could finally speak openly about their experiences without fear of judgment or belittling. She developed specific therapeutic techniques that took into account the intersectionality between war trauma and gender discrimination. Maria became a pioneer. She published studies, gave lectures, and trained other therapists. She proved with concrete data that female veterans had specific needs that were not being met by the system. And most importantly, she saved lives. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of female veterans found in Maria someone who finally saw them as they were, real combatants with real wounds who deserved real care. Today, in her 70s, Maria still sees patients. She could have retired long ago, but she says that as long as there is a veteran suffering in silence, she will continue working. Her office in Los Angeles has become almost a sanctuary, a place where women whom society has insisted on making invisible can finally be seen. But both James's and Maria's stories have a specific moment, a critical point where everything could have gone very wrong, where the line between giving up and transformation was so thin it almost didn't exist. And I need to tell you about these moments because they reveal something profound about human nature and about what really makes a difference when someone is at rock bottom. For James, that moment came on a winter night in Detroit, 1973, 3 years after returning from the war. He was at the lowest point of his addiction, having literally lost everything. His wife had left. His family no longer spoke to him. The miserable apartment where he lived was about to be evicted. And on that particular night, with snow falling outside and the cold seeping in through the broken windows, James sat on the floor with an empty bottle in one hand and a gun in the other. He doesn't remember how long he stayed there. It could have been minutes or hours. All he remembers is the absolute silence, not even the cries of war in his head, not even the noise of the city, just silence. And in that silence, a question arose. If he was doing this, who would help that veteran he met on the stairs last week? Who would be there for the next person who came back broken from the war? It seems simple, right? Almost silly. But at that moment, that question was the difference between life and death. Because suddenly James realized that his pain could have meaning, that his wounds could be transformed into tools of healing for others, that he didn't need to die with his wounds, he could be reborn through them. He put the gun aside. It wasn't a grand or dramatic decision. It was simply, not today, and the next day, not today again. And so it went. day after day, until the days turned into weeks, turned into months, turned into a lifetime, dedicated to ensuring that other veterans didn't arrive on that cold ground with a gun in their hand. For Maria, the critical moment was that phone call I mentioned. But there are details you need to know. When she picked up the phone that night in 1975, she had already written a farewell letter. She had already organized everything. She was prepared to end that pain that seemed endless. The volunteer on the other end had no specialized training in war trauma. She was just a woman who cared and decided to dedicate a few nights a week to answering calls from people in crisis. But she did something no one had done for Maria in years. She believed her. When Maria spoke about the things she saw in Vietnam, the volunteer didn't say, "It can't be that bad," or "You need to get over it." She said, "I believe you, and what you went through was real and important." That simple validation, that basic recognition of humanity, was like throwing a rope to someone drowning. Maria grabbed it, and as she spoke, as she was listened to without judgment, something broken within her began to rearrange itself. It didn't heal that night, of course, but it created a crack in the wall of despair through which a little light managed to enter. At the end of the call, which lasted almost 4 hours, Maria realized that if a person without any specific training could make such a difference with just genuine empathy, imagine what someone truly prepared could do. Imagine what she herself could do if she transformed her pain into professional expertise. "That's when I realized," she said years later in a lecture, "that either I would die with my wounds or I would be reborn through them. There was no middle ground." These decisions, these turning points, were not unique. They happened quietly in the lives of thousands of veterans across the country. And one of those lives I want to show you now because it will complete the picture in a way you might not expect. Robert Chen, whom everyone calls Bobby, returned from the Iraq War in 2008. He was from the new generation of forgotten veterans, proving that decades after Vietnam, the system still hadn't learned anything. Bobby was 25 years old, had served 2 tours in Baghdad, and returned to Seattle carrying demons he didn't know how to name. His story has similarities to James and Maria's, but also important differences. Bobby didn't go straight to alcohol. He went straight to hard drugs. Oxycodone first, legitimately prescribed for back pain from carrying heavy equipment, then Vicodin, then whatever he could get on the street when the prescriptions ran out. In less than a year, he was addicted to heroin. Bobby's downfall was swift and brutal. He lost his apartment within 6 months. He lost contact with his family in less than a year. And suddenly, there he was, a war veteran living on the streets of Seattle, sleeping under overpasses, doing anything for the next hit. People passed him every day without the slightest idea that this dirty man begging for spare change had risked his life for their country. For 3 years, Bobby lived on the streets. 3 full years. And in that time, he saw things that rivaled the horrors of war. He saw people die of overdoses next to him. He saw violence, exploitation, despair in its purest form. Several times he almost died himself, whether from overdose, from the cold, from urban violence. It was as if the war had never ended, only changed scenery. The turning point for Bobby came from an unexpected place. One day he was so unwell, so sick from withdrawal, that he literally couldn't move. "I was lying in an alley when an Asian gentleman, probably in his 60s, stopped. Most people would have gone around him. This guy stopped. Instead of giving him money or food, he sat on the dirty ground next to Bobby and started talking. He discovered that Bobby's last name was Chen because his father was Chinese American. The man, whose name was Mr. Liu, was a martial arts master and had a small dojo in the area. He made an absurd offer. If Bobby wanted to try to get out of that hole, the dojo would be open to him. Bobby didn't believe it. He thought it was a hallucination, but Mr. Liu returned the next day. And the next. every morning for a week until Bobby finally agreed to go there. And that's where the most improbable transformation began. Mr. Liu wasn't a social worker. He wasn't a therapist. He was simply a man who understood that physical discipline could help rebuild mental discipline. He put Bobby on an intense rehabilitation program that combined addiction treatment with martial arts training. And it worked. It wasn't easy. God, it wasn't easy at all. Bobby had relapses. There were times he wanted to give up, but Mr. Liu and the small dojo community didn't give up on him. They saw beyond the homeless addict. They saw a veteran, a fighter, someone who had survived things that would break most people. It took Bobby 2 years to get completely sober, another year for him to stabilize emotionally. But when he did, something extraordinary happened. He discovered that martial arts weren't just about fighting. They were about discipline, respect, community, everything he had lost after the war. Today, 15 years after that encounter in an alley, Bobby is a self-defense instructor, but not for just anyone. He works specifically with veterans. He uses martial arts as a therapeutic tool to help others struggling with addiction, PTSD, and lack of purpose. He opened a small space in Seattle that has already helped hundreds of veterans find stability through mindful physical movement. Bobby's transformation proves something fundamental. There is no single path to healing. James found purpose in creating shelter, Maria in becoming a therapist, Bobby in teaching martial arts. But they all had something in common. They transformed their deepest wounds into tools to help others. And here's the truth. No one tells you about trauma and transformation. Pain without purpose is destructive, but pain with purpose can be the most powerful force in the universe. When you take the worst moment of your life and decide that it will mean something, that it will serve to prevent others from suffering the same way, the pain doesn't disappear, but its nature changes. It becomes fuel instead of poison. James, Maria, and Bobby didn't know each other. They were in different cities at slightly different times, fighting similar but unique battles. But without knowing it, they were part of something bigger, an invisible network of veterans that the government had forgotten, but who hadn't forgotten each other. Because there came a moment when these individual stories began to connect. James in Detroit creating a support group, Maria in Los Angeles offering free therapy to female veterans, Bobby in Seattle teaching self-defense to those who had lost their sense of control over their own lives. Each of them was doing their part, but together they were creating a web of support that reached far beyond what anyone could do alone. And this forgotten brotherhood, as some began to call it, spread. Groups organized entirely by veterans began to emerge. They no longer waited for the government to solve the problem. They themselves became the solution. In Chicago, veterans created a work cooperative to help each other find jobs. In Phoenix, they set up a mentoring program where older veterans helped younger ones reintegrate. In Boston, they opened a free mental health clinic focused on war trauma. The government had forgotten about them, but they hadn't forgotten about each other. That phrase became almost a mantra because it represented a profound truth. When institutions fail, communities can rise up. When the system abandons us, people can save each other. Shared pain became collective strength in a way that perhaps only those who have experienced extreme trauma can fully understand. Because when you're suffering alone, it feels like you are the problem. But when you find others who understand exactly what you're feeling, you realize that the problem is bigger than you. And in some strange way, that gives you strength. It removes the weight of individual guilt and transforms it into a collective struggle. The community projects that emerged from this movement are inspiring. In Memphis, veterans created an urban farm that not only produces organic food, but also serves as occupational therapy for those struggling with PTSD. In Portland, they set up a community auto repair shop where veterans learn skills while repairing low-income vehicles. In Miami, they founded an adapted surf school for veterans with physical disabilities. Each project was different, tailored to the specific needs of each community, but they all shared the same DNA: veterans helping veterans. People who understood the pain because they had felt it themselves. There was no judgment, there was no pitying gaze, just mutual recognition and a genuine desire to help. And look at the impact of this. Just to give you an idea of real numbers, James's shelter in Detroit has already taken in more than 3,000 veterans since it was founded. Their social reintegration rate is 84%. 84% of people who were literally on the street have managed to get stable jobs, housing, and family reconnection. Maria trained over 200 therapists in specific techniques for treating female war trauma. These 200 people then treated thousands of female veterans. The ripple effect is exponential. One healed person can heal 10. Those 10 can heal 100. And so it goes. Bobby worked directly with over 500 veterans in his martial arts program. Of those, 72% overcame addictions and have been sober for more than 5 years. Some have become instructors as well, further expanding the program's reach. But beyond the numbers, there's something deeper. There's the invisible legacy, the one that doesn't appear in statistics but changes the world nonetheless. How many children grew up with present parents because those parents were helped by James? How many families reconnected because a veteran finally managed to process her trauma with Maria's help? How many lives were saved because Bobby showed that a fresh start is possible? The paradox is beautiful and tragic at the same time. Those who were most wounded became the greatest healers. The people whom society completely abandoned became the safety net for the next generation of the abandoned. Those who had nothing to give materially gave what they had most valuable: lived experience, genuine empathy, concrete hope based on evidence that transformation is real. And this raises a fundamental question that we need to face. If all this was possible despite the system, imagine what would be possible with adequate support. If veterans managed to create this entire support network with practically no resources, what could they do with appropriate investment? With public policies that actually work, with genuine social recognition? Because here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to talk about. This still happens. Now. Today. While you watch this video, there are veterans from Afghanistan, Iraq, from operations we don't even know existed, returning home and facing the same crap that James faced in 50 years later, and the system basically hasn't changed. There's still a stark contrast between those who rise and those who are forgotten. There are still officers becoming politicians, well-paid consultants, company directors, while rank-and-file soldiers struggle to get basic treatment in the VA. There are still veterans dying of overdoses at alarming rates. There are still homeless people who served their country sleeping on the streets while we walk right past. The suicide rate among veterans is 22 people a day. A day. Let that sink in. While you work, eat, sleep, 22 people who risk their lives for their country decide they can no longer live with the pain. And the system continues to fail them in the same way it failed generations ago. But here's the other side of the coin, the part that gives hope. Stories of rebirth prove that human resilience is real. That even when everything seems lost, when you've been forgotten by everyone, when the pain seems greater than any possibility of healing, it's still possible to rebuild, not alone perhaps, but with community, with purpose, with someone who believes in you when you can't believe in yourself. James, Maria, Bobby, and thousands like them are living proof of this. They didn't need medals. They didn't need public recognition. They didn't need statues or tributes. They needed a chance. Someone who could see beyond the dirt, the addiction, the trauma. Someone who could see the complete human being beneath all those layers of pain. And when they got that chance, when someone threw them that rope at the critical moment, look what they did. They transformed personal hells into life missions. They took the worst thing that could have happened and decided that it would mean something, that it would serve to ensure that the next person wouldn't have to suffer in the same way. That's true heroism, you know. It's not killing enemies in war. It's not following orders under fire. It's waking up every day carrying unseen weight and still deciding to help others carry theirs. It's turning poison into medicine. It's making your weakest point your greatest strength. And the truth is, we need these stories now more than ever, because in a world that loves to glorify war but forgets warriors, in a system that celebrates leaders but abandons those who carry them out, in these stories, we find what truly matters: humanity, connection, the incredible capacity we have to lift each other up even when we've been knocked down. So if you've made it this far, if these stories have touched you in some way, I want you to stop for a second and reflect. Who in your life might be fighting an invisible battle? Who might need someone who will simply listen without judgment? Who might be in one of those critical moments, holding their own life in their hands, waiting for a reason to keep going? You don't need to have all the answers. James didn't when he sat with that veteran on the stairs. The volunteer who attended to Maria didn't have specialized training. Mr. Liu wasn't a professional therapist, but they all made a difference because they genuinely cared and acted on that care. And perhaps that's the most important message of all. Transformation doesn't need perfection. It needs presence. It needs someone willing to sit in the dirt with you, to hold your hand in the dark, to believe in you when you've forgotten how to believe in yourself. War wounds, whether from military battles or the silent wars each of us faces in life, can become wings. They can lift you up and allow you to reach heights you never imagined possible. But first, you need to decide, will I die with my wounds, or will I be reborn through them? James decided. Maria decided. Bobby decided. And thousands of other forgotten veterans decided as well. They transformed abandonment into community, pain into purpose, trauma into a tool for healing. They proved that even when the system completely fails, when society turns its back, when everything seems lost, there is still a force within us capable of creating the impossible. Comment below, Renaissance is possible. There is still a force within us capable of creating the impossible. And look, if you've made it this far with me, to this point in the video, I know it's no coincidence. You're not the type of person who consumes superficial content and moves on. You seek depth, you seek real stories, you seek to understand the side of life that most people prefer to ignore. And it's exactly for people like you that I create this type of content. So if it makes sense for you to continue on this journey with me, if you want more stories like this, that move you, that transform you, that show the real side of the human condition, subscribe to the channel now. Because every week I bring content that goes beyond the ordinary, that delves deep into topics that truly matter. And by subscribing, you guarantee you won't miss any. And leave a comment here saying, "I'm with you until the end." That way I know you really connected with this message, that you're part of this community of people who believe in real transformation. Your comments make all the difference, truly. They show that there are people on the other side who care, who pay attention, who want to see more. Click the like button too, okay? Because when you do that, you're not just liking a video, you're saying that this kind of story deserves to be seen by more people, that forgotten veterans deserve to be remembered, that transformation through pain is a message that needs to reach those who are going through the most difficult moment of their lives right now. And look, there's a video over here that will complement everything we've talked about here. It's about people who were also forgotten by the system but found strength where no one imagined it existed. Click and continue with me there, because the conversation doesn't end here. Thank you for staying until the end, from the bottom of my heart. See you in the next video.